I was sitting in this chair on Sunday, 21st of July, 2002. Of course, I was reading. It was about 9 minutes to 4 when a totally extraordinary thing happened. There was a very loud noise of a kind which I'd never experienced before. It lasted, well, we argued about how long it lasted afterwards, but it was something between 10 and 15 seconds, and then almost as suddenly as it started, it stopped. I was here on my own at the time. Sumitra was away in Durban. And, well, it immediately set me thinking, what had happened? What was it all about? About 2 minutes later, a friend phoned me from Maseru and said, "Hey, did you know the Makwanyani barracks have blown up?" I said, "No." I heard the same noise, but it wasn't exploding ammunition. I remembered in 1998 when the SADC forces had exploded ammunition, and it was a completely different noise. This noise was high up in the sky, and it didn't reverberate like thunder does around the cliffs of the valley. And I began, well, to work out what it might be. I actually phoned the seismologist with the LHDA to see whether there'd been any kind of earth tremor, but no. So by that evening I was convinced that what had happened was high up in the atmosphere, and the only possible explanation could be a meteorite which had entered and exploded above Lesotho. It happened to be near the beginning of term, and that following week I gave a job to Mamhlongo. I said, "Look, let's try and find out what we can about that noise. Find out who heard it and where they heard it." And so she took a questionnaire, which looks like this, and she stood on the steps of the university library and asked students, had they heard the noise? And rather to our surprise, we found that nearly everybody had heard the noise, all the way from Butabuti to Mahalishoek. We also asked them what they thought it was. There were various questions. What was the explanation? Any other comments? Some of them thought it was, well, most of them actually, some thought it was planes crashing in the sky, but there was no such reported event. Most of them who had any guess whatsoever, most said, Haritsebi Hohang, but we don't know. But many of them said, well, it was the soldiers, because any sort of noises and explosions are attributed to the military. An interesting report came from Thuathe. Now, that afternoon was cloudy, unusual in winter, but in Thuathe there was quite a bit of clear sky. And in Thuathe, one student had actually reported what we now know to be a dust trail that are going from east to west across the sky. Well, I put together all the information and I wrote it up in our Know Your Campus series. This explosion had been on the 21st of July. On the 2nd of August, I actually prepared for the issue of the information flash my tentative explanation of the explosion. And I had a meteorite coming in. Probably the trajectory isn't really the way a meteorite actually comes, but and exploding. And I placed the point of explosion very high above a triangle which might be bounded by Teatianing, Tiwai, Maseru, and Roma. The actual map which shows the places where the sound was heard was this one. It was actually heard from Mahalishoek to Butabuti as far east as Thuathe, but not in Mahotlong, not in Katjas Nek, and not in Moyeni. It was also heard in the Free State. And as we found out later, some people actually saw a flash of light at that time descending into the clouds over Lesotho. Well, I thought that was the end of the story. The thing had clearly exploded and come down as dust. But I was wrong. and I sent a copy of my findings to the Department of Mines and Geology in Maseru. But to my surprise, it wasn't the end of the story, because shortly afterwards, the police newspaper arrived. That's the Sedi Kasepelesa. And it had as a headline, Naledi Ewela Thuathe. A star has fallen on the Thuathe Plateau. And when you went and read on, the story is about villagers from the village of Haradimu who went to Maseru, taking rocks with them as specimens, and complaining to the police that somebody had been dropping rocks on them from the sky. Now, of course, the police had to say, well, you know, people shouldn't be dropping rocks from the sky on you, but if we open a charge sheet, who are we going to charge? And the police, in fact, took these people to the Department of Mines and Geology. And they went up onto the plateau, and sure enough, there were stones which had fallen from the sky, and they had some specimens. And because I reported the original incident to them, they phoned me up and they said, well, we have got some rocks, and would you like to come, if you'd come down to Maseru, we can go up to where they were found. So I went up onto the plateau with one of the geologists, and there were indeed stones, and I came back with 5, which I purchased from the local herd boys. So what do you do about a meteorite? I mean, where do you report it? I reported this meteorite to the Natural History Museum in London. It's part of the British Museum. And there is it there, a lady called Monica Grady, who's a sort of world expert on meteoritics. That's what it's called. It's not meteorology because that's been preempted by the weather people. So the science is called meteoritics. And she informed Professor Uwe Reimold, who's Professor of Mineralogy in Wits University, about what had happened. And he phoned me up. He said, hey, you've got a meteorite fall. And he was very excited because a fall is a very rare event. Most of the meteorites in the world which are picked up are in deserts where they maybe fell hundreds, mainly thousands of years ago. And they weren't witnessed by anybody now living. So to actually have this happen was something very exciting. And he came down, we took him up to the plateau, and he managed to go back with something like 40 stones, and he was very, very pleased. And he said, look, we've got to do this properly. We've got to actually document this. He told me about a famous fall, the Saint Robert Fall in Quebec, which had been about some 15 years or so earlier, and how it had been seen over the whole of the northeast of the United States and Canada, and then they went to look for stones, and they had everybody, students, farmers. It was a place, quite a remote place, partly farming, partly forest, and everybody searched for stones, but they only recovered 20 stones. And, well, I thought, well, we've already recovered more than that, but perhaps, it's not such a big job. But it turned out that we were going to spend a lot of time on this meteorite, because he said, you must define the strewn field. The strewn field is where the meteoritic stones have fallen. And since we were on the edge of the plateau, and the stones have fallen on the plateau, we thought immediately, since we knew from our other research that it had gone from east to west, that we could look down below the plateau. And so the first place that we tried after the plateau was a village called Bokati Hamajara. We went there a week afterwards, and there was a pizza going on. And we asked the chieftainess, we had 1 or 2 stones with us, could we talk to the people in the pizza? And she said yes. And we showed these stones to the people, and they said yes. These are the stones that fell when there was that loud noise on the Sunday. And they fell in our gardens all round in the village. And some of them were hot. We picked them up and they were still hot. But, qu'image faire? It's just stones. We threw them away. So we said, well, if we come back, do you think you could find us some of these stones? Because we would be interested in seeing them and perhaps to buy them. So we went back a few days later, and sure enough, lots of the people had stones. And we bought them, and people were very pleased, because they had no idea they had any value whatsoever. At that time, we didn't really know what their value was. They were, to us, scientific value, because we were trying to document the strewn field. They said, look, come back again in a week's time. And we did. This time, they didn't just look in their gardens. They looked everywhere, all around the village, the graveyard, the escarpment, and the dongas. And when we came back, there were hundreds of them, hundreds of stones. And actually, we ran out of money because we had no idea we were going to get so many. So of course, we had to define the whole of the strewn field. And we actually went round a whole lot of villages. We went to one village where Thuathe, where a lady told us just exactly what happened. How, well, she was sitting just by she was doing her cooking actually, and she went, she heard a loud noise, she thought it was a thunderstorm, she went round the back of the house, there was no thunderstorm, and then whoosh, a meteorite landed right in her cooking area. It cracked one of her water containers. And, but, well, she thought maybe it's a tokolus, a very powerful one to do this in daylight. But she was equal to the event because in the house she had holy water which had been blessed in church. She came out and she sprinkled it on the meteorite and then all the way around the cooking area and her house. And it worked because no more meteorites fell. And actually all those meteorites fell within a few seconds of each other over as many as 9 villages. Up at Hamotwang. Hamotwang is on another lobe of the Thuathe Plateau. And we climbed up from Hatibakwadi up to that village. And we found an old lady, Nkhono Makhala. She was born in 1914. And the meteorite had fallen just near to her rondavel. And there were several people around, and they gathered around it and they looked at it. And, well, they said, don't pick it up, it's going to explode. But Nkhono Makhala said, and she picked it up and put it in her house. But by the time we got there, she'd thought it was of no value and she'd thrown it away. And it had fallen amongst the charcoal she'd been burning for decades. And it was difficult to find, so we never did find that particular one. But the story was convincing. So we made a map of the strewn field. The map of the strewn field, it was an ellipse. And we divided it into Zone A, which was on top of the cliffs. That's where most of the stones fell. Zone B, where still a large number of stones fell, which was on the west of this Hometswana stream, and included villages like Bukati Hamajara, Hamotwani, and so on. The children in this school were very, very helpful. There's a school in the strewn field, which we will talk about in a moment, and they were very helpful. They went and gathered lots of the stones, and we asked each of the children where they had found it. And in the end, we became a complete expert on all the place names in the area. The names of the dongas, the names of all kinds of rocks, different parts of the village, rock formations on the escarpment and so on. And we were able to plot for each stone where, more or less, where it had been found. And the grey areas are villages. Nobody was injured, although stones did hit the roofs of some houses. And this is Hamotwang, where Nkhono Makhala, that's on another lobe of the Thuathe Plateau. Here is, somewhere here, yes, Bukati Hasofania, it's a big village here. And when I'd done the draft of the ellipse, it's I think about 7.4 kilometers long, about 1.9 kilometers wide, I puzzled because it just so happened that the satellite Earth station is included in that area, just on the edge of it, at Hasofania. This is where Lesotho, I think it's Telkom Lesotho now, actually has the satellite dishes, which are 13 kilometers in diameter, 30 meters in diameter, and they, all the international telephone traffic is routed through those. Now that's a security area with a fence around it. I thought, well, the local people have been picking up stones, and by now we have many hundreds, but they wouldn't be able to pick them up inside the security area. So I said, well, let's see if we can go get permission to go inside there. And I was fortunate because one of my former students was working there, and he said, no, we can meet there, and we will let you come in. So I took binoculars to look at the dishes because I wanted to see whether there was any damage on them. Actually, I couldn't find any. But then I looked down below to see if any stones had bounced off. Couldn't find any. But by now, this was a bit late, quite a bit later, 2 or 3 months later, and the grass had grown, and it was very difficult to find stones. But Mamplongo, she was very lucky. She did something that many meteorite collectors apparently dream of. On the concrete apron where people park the cars in the satellite Earth station there, she actually found a small meteorite, and she still has it to this day. Well, what happened next? What we did was we made a catalogue of the stones, which we got, and we listed them according to a number of different things. Who was the finder, where the stone was found, its mass. The stones varied from as little as 1 gram all the way up to 2.6 kilograms. We also described the fractures on the stones. Maybe I should show you a stone, then you can see the kind of thing that we had. This is a relatively small one, and you wouldn't really think of it as anything very special. But what I'm holding here is something like 4,200 million years old. It's older than any of the rocks on Earth, and it comes from a time when the rocks on Earth were actually still molten. And it's got on it a fusion crust. The fusion crust is where the stone melted as it came through the atmosphere. And usually it has a number of markings, and it's got certain things in it when it's cut, like called chondrules, which you don't find in any rocks on Earth. It also has markings which are like thumbprints, and these are called regmaglyphs. It's caused by the molten stone, even vaporized stone, whirling around and abrading, taking off part of the surface of the stone. Well, we wrote up this in various places. A popular account of it appeared in the BBC Focus on Africa magazine, and that told about, as it is bombed by rocks, it was the reactions of various people when the stones fell around them. In one place somebody said, well, it was like a hailstorm, but they weren't hailstones. They were black. So that was one of the publications. Another publication was in a New Zealand magazine, Meteorite. And we got the cover story. Rocks rain down on Lesotho. Meanwhile, the scientific work was going on. Uwe Ramat, the professor of mineralogy at Wits, he assembled 2 or 3 people to work with me, and we got the cover story in the South African Journal of Science. Here we are, the Thuathe Meteorite. Mamplongo became a cover picture again, although a bit smaller this time. The catalogue became very popular because, as we will see later, and in the end we produced a second edition of it, which is here. But something else unexpected happened. Once we'd made the map of the strewn field, and before any of the publications appeared, it became known to a Pretoria meteorite collector called Ronnie Mackenzie, and he sent it, I think he faxed it, to Tucson, Arizona in the United States. And I had no idea that that was the center of the meteorite dealers' world. Tucson is where lots of meteorite dealers live. I didn't even know there were meteorite dealers. And one Monday morning, there was a knock on my door, and somebody came in, and he said, "Hi, I'm Mike Farmer. I'm from Tucson, Arizona. Let me introduce my colleague, Eric Olson, also from Tucson, Arizona. Have you got any meteorites for sale?" And they've flown in all the way from the United States, having seen the map of the strewn field, and they were very, very interested in meteorites. In fact, what they did was a bit different. They said at first, well, because I was cautious, I said, well, if these people have come all the way from America, these things must be valuable. So what they did was they brought a big suitcase, and I understood later that Mac Farmer did this in other places. He'd done it in the Moscow Academy of Sciences, he'd done it in the British Museum, and he put the meteorites out on the table, and he said, look, if you're a bit worried about buying or selling, I've got these ones here, and I'm prepared to exchange. And he brought a lot of interesting meteorites from many countries of the world, and I thought at first, well, I've got quite a lot of meteorites, I can do an exchange. So we exchanged these meteorites, more or less, gram for gram. To cut a long story short, I very quickly that morning acquired by exchange a collection of meteorites from all different continents, which I would otherwise have been unable to have done, and I suppose I got a new hobby. Let's have a look at these meteorites in some detail. This is a Cape York. Cape York is on the west side of Greenland. Very famous meteorite, it's even appeared on Greenland stamps. And the story of it appears in this book as well. The Inuit, the Eskimos, were actually, they had iron tips to their harpoons. And where was the iron coming from? And after some investigation, they were a bit secretive about it, they eventually said, well, we're actually getting the iron from this place in the ice, and there embedded in the ice was this great meteorite. I think it was Peary who was the American in that expedition, and he persuaded them to part with it in return for some more usable iron, and it's now in the it's in the New York, I think, Natural History Museum. So here's a piece of the Cape York. It's got very beautiful Widmanstätten lines on it. This is a thing you get because there's two different alloys of iron and nickel. This is mainly iron and nickel meteorite, and it shows these beautiful line patterns. Well, there were a lot of others. There's a little piece of Imilac from Chile, from the Atacama Desert. Here's Mike's visiting card. And here we've got, this is also, where's this one from? This is from Tanatuva, Russia. And almost pure iron, just like a mirror. You can see your face in it. Yep. This one, Tambo Quemado, it's from Peru. Also iron, showing the beautiful Widmanstätten lines. This one, it's an Esquel. It comes from Argentina. Hold it up to the light and you can actually see the light shining through it. This is a palisite. Palisites are almost pure nickel with olivine inclusions which are transparent when held up to the light. Can be made into very expensive jewellery. Another palisite is this one. This is a Shirakovsky palisite from Russia, from the southern Ural Mountains. also the light shines through. This one, Thuathe Meteorite, one of the most famous of all meteorites. It fell in the 1940s, let's have a look. It fell 12th of February 1947. And it fell in the eastern part of Siberia, in the Thuathe Meteorite mountains. An expedition was sent out to recover as much as possible of this. Almost pure ions. All the ions went to the Moscow Academy of Sciences. Mike Farmer was the one to prize them out of there by doing exchange. After Glasnost and Perestroika, they were prepared to exchange Russian meteorites for meteorites from elsewhere. It's got these beautiful regmaglyphs. Regmaglyphs are like thumbprints, where the molten metal from the meteorite as it came through whirled round and gouged out, ablated the surface. Zag. Zag is very much like the Thuathe Meteorite, even to the extent that people think, well, it's difficult to tell the difference. Zag, where does it come from? Well, it's difficult to tell you, because it comes from a very small place in the Sahara, which is disputed between, I think, 3 countries, between Algeria, Morocco, and Spanish Sahara, the Sahrawi Republic now. And Mike had just spent a month in Zag. I said, what's the place like? He said, there's nothing there. Well, he said, maybe a few goats. So I said, if there's a few goats, they must be eating something. It's about 200 people apparently, and it's a gravel desert. And he went there and he practically employed the whole population to trawl the desert looking for meteorites. So this is a piece of a Zag. It's got a nice section cut into it. This is a gibbon, which is from Namibia. Also beautiful 3-dimensional effect with the Widmanstetten lines. There's a very great we call it meteor crater, but it's really a meteorite crater in Arizona in the USA. I once actually walked around it. They don't let you do it anymore in case you fall in. Nearby, not necessarily the same meteorite, but is Canyon Diablo. It's a fall from a long way back, and people are still picking them up. That's a Canyon Diablo, very heavy, almost pure iron. This one's Vaca Muerta, the dead cow. That one I think is also from Chile. And this one, well, this is actually Dar al-Ghani. It's from Libya, and it's actually a Martian meteorite. It's a little piece of Mars. And what has happened is that the meteorite, some meteorite has hit Mars with such force that pieces have been chipped off it and have gone into orbit, and finally they've come into the Earth orbit. Interestingly, Martian meteorites are a bit commoner than lunar meteorites. Meteorites which have been chipped off the moon are rarer. Not quite sure why, but it's possibly because there's far more asteroids and meteorites floating around near Mars than there are near the moon, so that the collisions are more often. That's my hypothesis anyway. Later on, when we began to get a bit more friendly, he made offers to buy meteorites. And indeed, there was one big meteorite. It was the bear. The bear was this one here. And it was sitting on our mantelpiece. And he said, well, I'll give you $4,000 for that one. And then we began to sit up. But Ronnie Mackenzie had said in the meantime, you know, don't sell that meteorite. I'll match any price that anybody else offers. And we did in the end sell it to Ronnie for a much higher price. And a lot of the money that we got from that, we put back into the community in various ways. Indeed, we set up a meteorite fund so that the money we made was used to help to buy hospital equipment, to help children at the school, which was with school fees, and finally we managed to have enough money to build a new school building for them, and I hope we'll be able to see that in due course.
Hayalwana
Much of the work was done by the pupils. They gathered together the stones, and then we employed builders who were very skillful at putting them together. And you can see from the end wall the very nice pattern that developed. It's called skolapat, which in Sesotho is actually describes the tortoise, and it's like the shell of a tortoise. So it's quite an intricate pattern the way it's been put together. I'm in the village of Thuathe Hamajara, and I'm standing at the Thuathe Lesotho Evangelical Church Primary School, which was situated inside the strewn field. And a lot of the children of this school actually helped us in collecting stones and recording exactly where they found them. Now I've got with me Mema Vasia Bless, who's the headmistress, and she's going to tell us, I think, a little bit about the way in which the meteorite has helped her school.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Ambrose. It is true that the school has been helped by the meteorite, and here we are standing by the new building which has been built through the funds that were collected. They have also helped the children with their school fees and also the books in the library. This building has the office, the library, a classroom and a storeroom. And we are pleased to have a library which most of the schools do not have.
How many children have you got?
We have 182 children in the school, and the number has increased since the new building has been erected.
So parents are sending them here instead of some other schools?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And we are only 4 teachers here, and really we are working hard.
4 teachers teaching 7
4 teachers teaching 7 classes.
classes. Yeah, it's hard work.
Yes.
Well, yes, this is the library. It had a disaster because not long after we'd completed the building, there was a tremendous windstorm which hit parts of Maseru and several villages, and it took the roof off. And the library that we'd established, a lot of them were spoilt. But now we've restored it, we've got a new roof, and the library, I see, is being kept very neat and tidy. And you've got an abacus. Where did that come from? Somebody made it?
No, we all set together to formulate this.
So did we pay for this as well?
Yes,
we did. From the meteorite, yes, I thought we had. So we're in the Standard 1 and Standard 2 classroom. This is Me Matseparan Mafika,
Yes.
who's a teacher for Standards 1 and 2. And how many children have you got in Standard 1?
In Standard 1 I have 30.
30.
Yes.
And Standard 2?
Standard 2, 20.
20. So 50 altogether in this
altogether.
classroom.
Yes.
And how do you teach them? Do you teach one and then you teach the other?
Yes, I do that. I give Standard 2 some work, then I go to Standard 1. Then from Standard 1, I go to mark the Standard 2 class.
I see.
Yes,
So
that's how I do.
Quite a bit of management to do that, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. And are there more boys than girls, or more girls than boys?
There are more girls than boys.
Boys are more. Which is unusual in the Lesotho primary schools, I think.
How are you?
Buona teacher. Silvente, bueno, ubatawita.
Police.
Leponesa, a policeman. Okay. You? Oba Lesole. That's a young lady wants to be a soldier. And what about you? Buena? A security man. Where then? In the mines. You want to work in the mines. What about over here? What would you like to do? CID. CID. Ooh, plainclothes policeman. Well, let's now look at one or two of the Thuathe meteorites. Enormous number of those. We got literally over 1,000, and they're in this catalogue. And here they are, as they came in at the school, from the school, with the name of the finder and the stone. We then actually found the mass, and we then catalogued them. Here's a couple of stones, particularly I'll show you. This one is the one that Madineo found. It fell into her cooking area at Hasophonia. Nice smooth stone, typical black fusion crust, which is what you get on a stone. And usually there are fractures because the enormous stress. The interior of the meteorite is incredibly cold, and of course the exterior is the temperature of melting stone, and that causes fractures, and it causes the thing to break up into pieces, and the pieces to break up into more pieces, and so on. This one is quite interesting. You've got a fracture there, but you've got a fracture here, and after that fracture, as it was still falling to the earth, the fusion crust bled over the edge. So it's like molten stone bleeding over the open wound of the fracture of the meteorite. Then one of the, possibly my favourite stone is this one here. This one we call the fish. It's a fish because it's swimming in this direction. It appears in the pictures with Mamslongo holding it. She's got the one we call the bear in one hand and the fish in the other hand. We no longer have the bear. It's been turned into a primary school. But the fish we've retained, and it's an oriented meteorite. An oriented meteorite is quite rare. Most of them tumble in space as they come, but this one has gone in a constant direction, so you've got streamlines of molten stone going across the earlier surface here. That is a small chip, very common in meteorites. That, however, is a chondrule. These are these important diagnostic materials which you find only in meteorites. So that one is the fish. There it is, but it's swimming this way now. Meanwhile, the scientific work proceeded, and the authoritative paper on the meteorite was the work of 9 different people, including myself, in many different countries. We collaborated with a meteoritics research establishment in Japan, others in Heidelberg and Mainz in Germany. Wits University, of course, was involved. There was a centre in Milton Keynes in England, and the final paper, if it is the final paper, there may still be work to be done, was here, published in the journal Meteoritics and Planetary Science. And Thuathe, that was the name that was given to the meteorite, so it's registered as the Thuathe Meteorite. A new H4, H5 chondrule, or chondrite. The meteorites are classified in various ways, but the kind of chondrules which appear in the in the stones a diagnostic from Lesotho. History of the fall, petrography, and geochemistry. So pretty well everything that we could tell about the fall is there. From the strewn field, for example, you can tell quite a bit about the direction it fell and the angle at which it came. If something came straight down, the strewn field would be a circle. But because it was actually an ellipse, then you know that it came down at an angle, and you can calculate what that angle was. We knew the time, and we knew where the Earth was in its orbit around the Sun, so you get a fairly good idea as to where it came from. Now, most meteorites are actually from the asteroid belt. The asteroid belt is an area, or maybe it's a volume, anyway, a place between the planet Mars and Jupiter, where there ought to be a planet really, but instead there's lots of little pieces of small planets called asteroids, as if the original planet broke up into pieces. And some of the pieces are very large, they smashed into the Earth, it'd probably be the end of us. But some of them are also very small. We think this one was probably, from reconstruction from the stones we recovered, about 1 meter in diameter. And it was one of the so-called, well, it was like the Apollo asteroids. The typical asteroids are between Mars and Jupiter. But the Apollo asteroids are eccentric in the sense that they actually have orbits which are quite elongated ellipses, and they come inside the Earth's orbit. So occasionally they will intersect the atmosphere of the Earth and create an explosion, and as this one had.